What happens first? Well, the Barnier-Davis talks are in abeyance. Instead, right now, in order to avoid a cliff edge, the UK falling out of the EU in March 2019 without a deal, they have to agree a transition phase. And they aim to do it very quickly over the next few weeks.
It's urgent and it is a high priority on the agenda, and we're hoping that that's going to be negotiated in the next couple of months. It's not entirely straightforward. I think we understand that the terms on offer are it will be basically a continuation of the status quo, although of course the UK will have left the EU and therefore won't have a vote or seat at the table in future decisions.
To avoid the fabled cliff edge and secure a transition, Theresa May's Florence speech already conceded many principles. Her Brexiteer MPs may not like it, but the extension of current EU rules, ongoing budget contributions and loss of voting rights were all signalled back in November. Now EU states also seem to be moving, yielding some important ground on the future trading relationship. Michel Barnier insisted even last month that the UK had a binary choice between a single market Norway deal or a Canada-type trade deal, a point he rammed home with his graphic about Britain's Brexit choices. But the Canada comparison isn't really that useful and is already being undermined by people like Emmanuel Macron, who is saying quite clearly that Britain could get something far more ambitious than Canada's free trade treaty.
You will have your own solution, and my willingness, and that
will be a bespoke, special solution for Britain.
Sure, but you will. I take these two references because this special way should be consistent with the preservation of the single market and our collective interest.
But if the EU is ready to concede a sliding scale of access dependent on how closely the UK aligns with its rules, it's also used tough language in its guidelines about a level playing field. Under these terms, it'll try to close off the possibility of a deregulated Britain gaining a competitive advantage, what some Brexiteers call the Singapore model.
Singapore has a very authoritarian regime and totally different conditions for the economy. But I believe that United Kingdom is competitive due to the fact that it has the best universities in Europe, that London will remain the most important financial hub, not only in Europe, but worldwide.
The EU 27 showed impressive unity throughout the first phase of negotiations. But for months, people in Brussels have been telling me that they're not quite so confident it'll be so united in phase 2. Some countries are far more closely integrated with the UK economy after all, and some will have to pay more into the EU budget as British contributions taper. UK diplomats might find gaps they can exploit.
They're going to be negotiating a new financial agreement for the future in 2019. And without the British contributions for the future, the net contributors and the net recipient states may have different interests there.
And amid the snow-covered slopes of Davos, some European leaders appear to be going off-piste, suggesting full single market access could be available if the UK pays enough.
There has to be some price for full access, and to what extent this access is going to be available has to be made dependent on some other contributions, potentially including this financial contribution.
Perhaps the biggest change in Brexit atmospherics since the Phase 1 agreement last month is that European leaders, taking Britain's concessions on the Irish border as evidence that Downing Street is pursuing a softer way to Brexit, are starting to discuss the mutual interest in minimising trade disruption. The Dutch, for example, talking about wanting to minimise friction in their trade.
The initial reaction that United Kingdom must be punished is now changing, and people begin to understand that the only reasonable solution is to find an arrangement that is the best possible for both sides, that takes into account the interests and the needs of both sides. And I hope that the view of the Dutch Prime Minister will be the common view in the European Union. The Dutch Prime Minister is in the same situation as the German Chancellor. For the German economy, it is extremely important not to damage the economic relations.
Of course, what European leaders want are further signs that the UK intends to be very closely aligned on single market and customs rules. That possibility delights them, and one former Commission Mandarin told me it could lead to speedy trade agreements, including on access for the financial sector. The only problem in that case, he said, was I don't know how you could conclude meaningful trade deals of your own. Negotiators in Brussels will burn the midnight oil in coming months. But key choices, reconciling the global trading vision of Brexit with the mutual interest in keeping trade disruption to the minimum, must be taken by Theresa May's government, and soon.